Look, Jinxie quit Clash Royale because of heroes in level 16, and that got me thinking. Imagine if cards like the Mega Knight or Expo got their own hero versions. That wouldn't shake the meta. It would straight up kill it. Today, we're ranking the top 10 cards that should never get a hero, cards that are already annoying enough, and if they get a hero card, you wouldn't even want to queue a game, because rest in peace brain cells, dude. Coming in at number 10, we got the Graveyard. The Graveyard already is one of the most complained about win conditions in the game, and a huge reason for this is how it's played. Most Graveyard decks aren't about constant pressure or creative outplays. They're about control, defense, and time giving you the advantage. You defend everything, slow the game down, then drop your Graveyard when your opponent's counters are out of cycle. Over time, you don't need a massive breakthrough. You just need a few skeletons to connect here and there, and that chip damage adds up, eventually giving you the damage that you're looking for. The problem is that the playstyle leans heavily on RNG skeleton spawning, and the skeletons don't really spawn in a consistent position, which means even if you defend the same way twice, the outcome can be completely different. You can place your troops correctly, time your spells perfectly, and still watch a few skeletons slip through and take hundreds of HP off your tower. And that is why Reddit has some players calling the Graveyard the RNG one trick, because it feels like you're being punished even when you play well. From a personal perspective, that's what makes Graveyard so frustrating at higher levels. When you play against good players, matches come down to small decisions and clean execution as far as I've seen, instead of rewarding a precise defense, which works all the time. The thing with Graveyard is that it rewards patience and repetitiveness, and you pretty much defend until one Graveyard finally breaks through for you because of spawn luck or a split-second mistake by your opponent. Now, imagine adding a hero version of this card. The Graveyard already thrives in long games where value compounds, and we've seen this happen a ton with control decks, and a hero would just amplify that. The few ways you can actually outplay Graveyard right now is with predictable cards like the Poison, Valk Evo, or even some aggressive counter pushes when you defend well and force your opponent into awkward cycles, which would mean nothing if they added a broken mechanic, and that is exactly why the Graveyard hero wouldn't increase skill, because it would turn every matchup into a slow damage race where defending perfectly skill isn't enough. Before we move on to the next card, make sure to like and hype the video and join the Discord group, which is linked in the description of this video, where we talk about everything. Coming in at number 9, we got the Royal Giant. The Royal Giant is statistically one of the most used and most tilting cards on ladder, and that's especially true in the current meta. If you look at usage rates across Royale API, the Royal Giant consistently sits near the top win conditions, not because it's some sort of high skill card, but because it's reliable, forgiving, and extremely consistent. You don't need near perfect placements or creative setups like the Graveyard. You just defend, cycle, and drop the RG at the bridge and play it at the right time and force some good damage. That simplicity is exactly why it dominates. Most Royal Giant decks follow the exact same method. Cheap cycle cards, a building counter like the Earthquake or Lightning, and just enough defense to survive until the RG locks onto the tower. The gameplay is kind of repetitive, but it's super effective. And because the card shoots from a range, it already ignores one of the biggest risks that most win conditions have. The aspect where you need to cross the river and get close to the tower. That alone makes it frustrating to face, and especially when it's being constantly cycled back into your face every 30 seconds. Now here's the real issue. The Royal Giant already has an Evo, and that's more than enough in my opinion. From my personal perspective, a hero would make the Royal Giant from being strong to completely unplayable in the meta. Right now, there's still counterplay. You can outcycle, you can pressure opposite lane, you can even force awkward elixir trades, but a hero Royal Giant would completely take out the counters. Counters wouldn't even exist, to be honest. Matches would become so one-sided, with the meta revolving around hero Royal Giant decks and hard counters to it. Another key point is that it would lock the game into a repetitive and frustrating state where variety disappears and every ladder match feels the exact same way, which just kills the game, to be honest. Coming in at number 8, we got the Sparky, and a Sparky hero just blows my mind, dude. The Sparky has always been one of those cards that gives the community a constant headache because of how extreme its design is. At the core, the Sparky's built around one thing: massive burst damage. When it connects, it doesn't just deal damage, it completely deletes troops, wipes pushes, and swings momentum instantly. That's why Sparky decks are usually built around heavy punish win conditions, because players usually defend, build a tank in front of it, like the Giant or Goblin Giant, and suddenly you're dealing with a massive counterattack that that can end the game of just one mistake. What makes the Sparky so frustrating is that its strength often feels less about mechanical skill and more about forcing reactions that defending players under constant pressure to have the exact counter ready. Resets like the zap, e-wiz, or other distractions need to be played perfectly. If you're slightly late or low on elixir or even misplaced by a unit or a tile, the Sparky punishes you instantly, and that's why you constantly see debates online whether the Sparky is actually skillful or just punishing misclicks or just bad cycles. As far as I've seen, the most stressful part of playing against the Sparky is how much attention it demands, man. You can't even ignore it for a second. You have to be tracking its charge, tracking the reset cards, managing elixir, and trying not to overcommit against that. That's the main thing. All while dealing with the support troops in front of it and behind it. Even experienced players can get overwhelmed because one mistake, I'm not even joking, one mistake means losing your entire defense. In my opinion, a hero Sparky completely nukes the game. The Sparky already has a clear hard counter which keeps it balanced, mainly a reset mechanic or precisely timed cards. A hero layer would just reduce or bypass those counters, making the Sparky pushes far more reliable and far harder to stop. And instead of it being a high risk, high reward card, it would become consistent without the high risk part. That would be terrible for the meta, and games again would revolve around either running hard counters against Sparky hero or just straight up losing to unstoppable Sparky pushes. Another key aspect, and this applies to most heroes, is that deck diversity would just shrink and matchups would become a lot more matchup dependent and skill would just be removed from the game, man. And that is exactly why this card does not require a hero. Coming in at number 7, we got the E-Barbs. The E-Barbs are the definition of OG classic Brit Spam menace because they've been one of the most controversial cards in Clash Royale for years because of how they're played. Most E-Barb decks revolve around one simple idea: constant pressure and instant punishment for bad plays. Players wait for you to spend elixir, then immediately drop the E-Barbs at the bridge or even counter push after defending, and you see it being used in a lot of 3 Musketeer decks, a lot of Brit Spam decks, and because they're extremely high damage and fast movement speed, they force an immediate response. If you're even slightly low in elixir or out of position, they can take your tower in seconds and there's pretty much no way to come back. What makes the E-Barbs once again so frustrating is how little room for error they create. Unlike slower cards where you have time to react, the E-Barbs instantly demand perfect defense. You need the right card, the right placement, and the right timing, and if anything is off, even slightly, they shred your troops and convert defense into massive damage because they're so good at counterattacking. They just don't reward good play. They heavily punish small mistakes because sometimes even ending games with just one small misplay, and I've seen this happen quite a bit on mid ladder. Playing against E-Barb is like constantly tracking your opponent's cycle, trying not to overspend elixir, and holding specific counters just in case they drop them at the bridge, because there are some genius mid-lab players who just do that. They even add a rage, which is so annoying to face, man. We definitely don't want a hero version because the E-Barbs are balanced right now with the idea that they can be stopped with proper counters and good elixir management, and instead of being punishable, they would become reliably overwhelmingly strong like any other hero, and for this particular card, it would be game breaking. We don't want matches to revolve around constant bridge pressure like hyper bait, making the game even more no skill. The E-Barbs have already pushed the limits of the game before back in 2016, 2018, and we don't need a hero card that would just straight up kill the game. Coming in at number 6, we got the Freeze. The Freeze has always been one of the most hated spells in Clash Royale because of how it completely flips interactions, especially with Bowler Freeze and Loon Freeze decks where it's so annoying to face. Unlike most cards that create back and forth pressure, the Freeze removes the interaction entirely. Its whole purpose is simple: stop your opponent from playing the game for a few seconds. And in Clash Royale, where timing and reaction and speed are everything, those few seconds decide the entire game. That's why the Freeze is typically so frustrating to face. Most players pair it up with high damage win conditions like the Balloon, Graveyard, and even the Hog. This strat is straightforward. Force your opponent's defensive troops, then play your Freeze at the perfect moment so your troops can attack or move or even respond. What makes this so tilting is that you can't even defend this perfectly. Correct placements, correct timing, and even elixir traits which are good can't even stop you from losing your tower because everything suddenly freezes and there's nothing you can physically do. That's why so many people on Reddit discuss calling the Freeze the ultimate swing spell, and it doesn't reward better strategy. It punishes your opponent's reaction. From a personal perspective, intuitive. Playing against Freeze feels like less strategy and more like guessing when your opponent is gonna press that one button if you track his rotation. With Supercell, God knows what they're gonna do with this card, and with spells, you need to be extremely careful or the game gets cooked instantly. Coming in at number 5, we got the E-Giant. The E-Giant is statistically one of the most frustrating and annoying cards in Clash Royale because of how its core mechanic works. Unlike most tanks that rely on support troops to deal damage, the E-Giant actually punishes you for defending it. Its built-in zap field reflects damage to nearby troops, constantly resetting it and taking out defensive units. That means even when you counter correctly, you're still losing value, losing tempo, and your defense is just getting cooked. The way the E-Giant is typically played makes this even worse. Most decks revolve around the heavy beatdown pushes, building elixir, placing the E-Giant in the back, then stacking support troops behind it, while spells remove buildings or any counter. Because of how the zap reflection works, swarm troops disappear instantly, Inferno units like the Inferno Dragon or the Inferno Tower gets reset, and low HP troops simply vanish. You're forced into very specific counters or perfect kiting, and if anything goes wrong, the push snowballs into overwhelming tower damage. And if you remember anything about the 2020 or 2023 E-Giant mirror meta, you know how cancer this card was. From a personal perspective, playing against the E-Giant is exhausting because defense never feels rewarding unless you have a specific counter for the E-Giant. You can make the correct play and still fall behind because your troops just get wiped out by just attacking the E-Giant. It creates that constant pressure. Now imagine a hero version of the E-Giant. For example, a hero ability that could temporarily amplify its electric aura, increasing the damage, reflection range, or strengthening the zap effect so nearby troops take even more damage, or whatever the heck Supercell does with this hero card. That would completely remove the most defensive counterplay, and cards that would normally counter the E-Giant would become just obsolete. Every push would feel way too strong, and that is exactly why the E-Giant in specific should never get a hero card. Its entire design already revolves around removing defensive value, and adding a hero card would push that concept way too far, making interactions very one-sided and potentially break the game. Coming in at number 4, we got the Balloon. The Balloon has always been one of those win conditions that's traditionally high skill, except for when it's abused with Lava Hound. That's because of how extreme its damage output is. The card is designed around massive burst damage like the Sparky, but less damage. But one hit alone can take a huge portion of your tower, and even if you defend it, the death damage can still punish you. That's why Balloon decks are usually built around forcing just one successful connection. Players defend, build elixir, and then support the Balloon with cards like the Freeze, Lumberjack, or Rage to guarantee at least one hit. And most of the time, that single hit is enough to decide the match. What makes the Balloon so frustrating is how unforgiving its interactions are. You can play strong defensive units like the Musketeer, Archers, Wizard, you name it, and still feel like you're barely stopping it. Or worse, it sneaks in one hit anyway. Because of its high health and direct tower targeting, defending Balloon requires perfect timing, proper placements, and the right card cycle. Even if you're slightly late or low in elixir, the punish factor is immediate and very strong. And that's why so many players I've seen find it hard to deal with the Balloon if they don't know what they're doing. Every push feels like a high pressure situation where one mistake like the other cards in this list can cost you the entire game. Playing against the Balloon always feels kind of stressful because you're constantly holding specific counters or saving elixir just in case it drops. Instead of making proactive plays, you're actually reacting to the Balloon because it does so much damage and it forces defensive units and limits your creative decision making. For example, a hero Balloon could temporarily increase its speed or make it harder to stop while approaching the tower, and with Supercell doing this, you already know what's gonna happen, man. They're just gonna break the game with a hero Balloon, and that would remove one of the few weaknesses the Balloon has, its vulnerability while crossing the arena. This would break the game in my opinion, and we don't need a hero Balloon. Coming in at number 3, we got the Firecracker. The Firecracker isn't the strongest card statistically, but it's easily one of the most hated cards in Clash Royale because of how frustrating its mechanics feel to play against. The card's entire identity revolves around its knockback attack and strange projectile behavior, which constantly disrupts normal interactions. Every time the Firecracker shoots, she pushes herself backwards, making her incredibly hard to take out efficiently. You try to spell her, she moves. You try to place a troop, she shifts positions and survives. It turns simple defensive interactions into awkward guessing games, and this was the case when she was first released. She fits into cheap cycle decks where players constantly apply pressure while the Firecracker sits safely behind her push, dealing splash damage and chipping everything down. Because of of her long range and recoil mechanics, she often survives multiple interactions and continues generating value far beyond her 3 elixir cost. She messes up swarm placements, disrupts pushes, and forces you to overspend just to remove her. That's why many players on Reddit describe her as unfun to play against or just impossible to take out in hog cycle decks, because she provides ridiculous value for such a cheap card, but her only weakness is that she gives free king tower activations. From a personal perspective, the Firecracker always feels annoying rather than skillful, and honestly, if you remember the Evo Firecracker when it first launched, that alone shows why this card should never get a hero version. With the Evo Firecracker release, it completely broke the meta. The extra damage, stronger pressure, and the constant splash burst value made her feel everywhere on ladder. Players were frustrated because every deck either ran her or specifically had a deck to counter her. It warped the entire game around one card because she got so much value for no reason at all. Now just imagine stacking a hero card on top of that design. A hero Firecracker would only turn an already annoying support card into a permanent threat, which would make players hate Clash. Coming in at number 2, we got the Expo. You might think the Expo isn't hated, but if you look at the ladder discussions on Reddit or even random YouTube comments, you know absolutely everyone and their mom hates this card. The reason is simple. Expo completely changes how the game is played, and instead of fast interactive matches with back and forth pushes, the Expo turns games into long defensive standoffs where you're constantly praying it never locks onto your tower as the best case scenario. The way Expo decks are typically played makes this even more frustrating. Most Expo players focus heavily on defensive control, cycling cheap cards, defending everything perfectly, and slowly creating an opening to place the Expo at the bridge. Once it locks onto your tower from across the arena, the damage ramps up quickly, and stopping that connection becomes incredibly stressful, believe it or not. Unlike most win conditions that must cross the river and risk being stopped, the Expo can just sit safely on your opponent's side and still destroy your tower from distance. That design alone has always felt unfair for most players or most new players. In fact, even in the early years of Clash, Expo was one of the most hated cards in the entire game, specifically because of the mechanic. The ability to shoot from long range and connect directly to towers made matches feel oppressive and frustrating, especially when defensive decks stalled games until a single lock decided everything. That reputation has stuck with the card ever since. What makes it even more interesting is that the Expo doesn't even have an Evo yet, and it's still widely disliked. That alone says a lot about how polarizing the card already is. Playing against the Expo always feels super tense because you're forced into constant reaction mode. Now imagine giving an Expo a hero version. God knows what Supercell would do with the Hero Expo, because dude, they're gonna do something absolutely insane. They're gonna make it so much harder to counter, and that's something that should never be added, dude. Just a broken Hero Expo from the opposite side, and you can't do anything about it. You're just cooked, man. And that is exactly why the Expo Hero is a no. And taking the number 1 spot with no surprise, it's the Mega Knight. This card is easily the king of issues in Clash Royale history, and if you scroll through Reddit, YouTube comments, or any ladder discussion, the Mega Knight is constantly called the most hated and most frustrating card in the entire game. And the funny thing is, players don't even hate it because it's always overpowered statistically. They hate it because of how it feels to play against. Mega Knight punishes every small mistake instantly at the lower arenas of Clash. You misplace a troop, overcommit elixir, or stack units close together, and suddenly a massive splash unit drops on your push, wipes everything, and turns defense into an offense immediately. And I've seen people lose instantly to counterattacks by just a Mega Knight at lower levels. Most players use him as a reactive punishment troop. They wait for you to build a push. His spawn damage, massive HP, and jumping mechanic allows him to clear troops while simultaneously threatening your tower, which is what players hate right now. And if you think that's frustrating, take a look at the Evo Mega Knight, and when the Evo launched, it made him even more oppressive. Literally uppercutting troops and launching them tiles away, it made him even more oppressive, completely destroying defensive positioning and spacing. It removed one of the key ways players normally counter tanks, proper placement. That alone shows how quickly the Mega Knight can become overwhelming and break the game. Now, just think about the idea of a hero Mega Knight on top of that. I don't even want to contemplate what Supercell would do with the hero Mega Knight, because it would just make us rage instantly. Honestly, if Clash Royale ever released the Mega Knight hero, many players would genuinely delete the game. And that's the end of it, man. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you want to know the new updated best cards to win more games in Clash, click on this video. Bye.